Hey, Trish.
Hi, Maria.
You look good.
Thanks. Are you working at home? I actually stopped into the office yesterday for the first time, and it looked like Spinnaker was still dark.
I am in the office today.
Hi, Lori.
How are you?
It's Trish. It's nice to meet you.
Trish, nice to meet you as well.
We are going to start right on time. I'm hoping that people may join us, but I want to be respectful. Everyone here is busy, yourself included, so I'm going to start on time and hope that people, are on time.
Wonderful.
Hello, Bill.
Trish, how are you?
Doing pretty well.
Hi, Bill.
Feeling better?
Yeah, slowly. I'm about 75%. Not all the way there yet, though.
Okay. Been through the ringer.
Yep. I take nothing for granted. It was a good learning experience.
Yep. How are you, Lori?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Great.
I see the ballpark is open.
It is hard. It's we're sort of pinching ourselves. We'll have one more series that won't be full because we sold the tickets back in April to people who wanted spacing and higher prices and stuff. So this first series in June will be full. So.
And you notice that big Thomas sign right near the scoreboard?
It looks great. I notice everything.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm
Yeah,
in
that
a
was
hotel in Minnesota, so I'm hoping the speed
I
is
thought
okay.
you were
on
flying
Wi-Fi.
back today, Bill. Are you going out?
No, tomorrow.
Okay.
So we're moving our son out of his apartment, Lori. This is the most thankless job there is.
Oh, it's terrible.
Ugh.
That's what my husband's for. The last time I moved one of them was our son after his second year of med school out of
Ugh,
Boston. Oh my goodness gracious.
No
It was
fun.
terrible. It was.
Well, at least it's not like in that August timeframe where it's always that 100-degree day and your kid lives on the 4th floor and
That's-
you're going up and down because there's no elevator.
That's what our move in was like, but the move out was just fine. The weather's been beautiful here, just like in Maine.
Good.
That's super. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
How we doing?
I was commenting that I can see people are going to trickle in, but out of respect for everyone's time, I'm going to try to start right on time and people can just join as they do.
Hopefully we'll get Dana on with us.
I think he may not be on until later.
Oh,
He, like the time frame, I think those emails that you and I were privy to, I think he knows that he'll come on at around 3:30. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. We'll switch right into Q&A.
wonderful. I'm sure none of you joining us today are tired after tax season officially ended. Is it officially ended?
I think for some of the tax people, but for some of the people in audit, they're still going and there's cleanup. And this has really been an 18-month tax season for many of them. It just started last year and then rolled into the PPP and the tax extension. So it's been, CPAs have really had a rough go of it this year.
Yeah, it's been quite a year.
For everybody, you're right. We've all had a rough go of it.
We just had an in-person commencement. That took a little planning, but it worked.
That's great. Congratulations to Chris too, Bill. He graduated, but it was remote.
It was remote, yes.
My son is actually graduating on Sunday at Fenway Park.
Oh, nice.
It certainly
That'll be
allows
cool.
for social distancing.
That'll be great.
I think that we are going to begin. We have most of our attendees from looking around the screen. So let's start. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2021 annual meeting for the Maine Society of CPAs. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. We are really excited today to have several representatives from the Maine Economic Recovery Committee to share with us a little bit about some information about the committee, some of its recommendations, and its potential impacts on the business community. I think what we'd like to do in terms of flow, we're going to have our panelists, we're going to keep this sort of informal so that we can have discussion and question. We would like to save all of the questions until each of the speakers has shared their information. You can certainly make use of the chat, or I think the group is small enough that once we get to the Q&A section, you could probably raise your hand. I'm going to introduce each of the speakers in the order of their comments. And thank you, all of you, for being here. Our first speaker will be Lori LaChance, who is president of Thomas College and co-chair of the Economic Recovery Committee. Lori is the 5th president and the first female and alumna to lead the college in its 127-year history, so quite an accomplishment. Previously, Lori served as president and CEO of the Maine Development Foundation. She was the Maine State economist for 3 administrations and the corporate economist at Central Maine Power Company. Lori is a frequent author and speaker on leadership, education, and the economy of Maine. Our second speaker is Bill Burke, who is co-chair of the Talent Subcommittee of the Economic Recovery Committee. And Bill is chairman of the Portland Sea Dogs and immediate past chairman of the Board of Trustees for Maine Health. He has extensive experience in the media industry, both in television and film production. He is an author and frequent speaker on leadership, business, and ethics. And Bill lends his expertise to many boards in Maine. Following Bill will be Susan Corbett, who is co-chair of the Infrastructure Subcommittee. Susan currently serves as the director of the National Digital Equity Center, a program of the Axiom Education and Training Center, collaborating with local and global change makers to close the digital divide in Maine and across the United States. Susan is former CEO of Axiom Technologies, a provider and advocate of fast, affordable, and reliable broadband services for rural communities. Prior to assuming the CEO role at Axiom, Susan served as the organization's CFO. Ms. Corbett is a preeminent author, public speaker, educator, and advocate for digital equity and inclusion. And wrapping up as our 4th speaker, we hope he will be able to join us. He was called into a meeting with Governor Mills, who holds a little bit more weight than I do, this afternoon. So he's hoping to call in a little bit later. We hope he'll be able to join us. He is a member of the Innovation Subcommittee. Dana is president of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. He began his career as the city manager of Presque Isle and later served as commissioner of transportation under 2 governors. And he served as leader of Governor King's transition team. He has received numerous awards for his service and leadership to the state of Maine. So I think you'll agree that we have some great speakers here today, and we really appreciate each of you sharing your time. So without further ado, Lori, I am going to turn it over to you to give us a general overview of the ERC. It's the people, the charge, and the process.
Great. Thank you so much for having us with you today, and congratulations on hopefully getting through the tax season unscathed as best as you can. We're all honored to be here with you. Very quick format. I'm going to give the overview and talk about our first report. Then I'm going to turn to Bill Burke, who is going to talk with you about our second and final report of the committee. And the 8 recommendations that were made. Susan gets to tell you about the governor's recent $1.13 billion investment and where that's going. And Dana, should he make an appearance, will tell you how it's impacted or what we think, how it will impact the business sector. So about a year ago, Josh Broder and I, the two co-chairs of the Economic Recovery Committee, got a call from Janet Mills. And it's a surprising thing to get a call from the governor on a Sunday afternoon. And it's certainly, no matter how busy you are, it doesn't set you up to say no to what she's calling you about. And she had an idea that she wanted to form an Economic Recovery Committee. And she kind of had a list of people she wanted to invite. But she asked if we would be willing to co-chair. And so we both said yes on that Sunday afternoon. And within a matter of a very few days, she said, okay, I'm personally inviting people myself. And she invited 40 people to join us, representing all walks of life across the entire geography of Maine, and including 4 from the state legislative offices, the caucuses, and the federal delegation. And within a week or so, she's like, okay, here's your charge and let's go. So away we went, quite not knowing exactly what we were going to do. But the charge she gave us was this. And in hindsight, wow, was she strategic and smart to have thought this far ahead. She wanted to pull this group together and give us the charge of lifting our eyes above the fire that was burning in front of us right now in the economy, and to imagine what path we would take and build a bridge through our recommendations that when we started the recovery, and none of us knew when that would be, we would have a set of recommendations to catalyze the economic growth of this state to get us back on track to the 10-year economic development strategy that had been released just in December of 2019. So over 1,500 Maine people got together, came up with a 10-year strategy for the growth of this state. And then within 3 months, everything was getting shut down for the pandemic. So she wanted some group, and wisely so, to be looking past the devastation that was happening in the economy. And that was our group. She invited the 40 people to come and join in. And we pretty quickly decided we better get ourselves organized. So we organized ourselves in a couple of ways. We felt we would need to first address ideas that would stabilize and support Maine's people and Maine's businesses. Because at that point, the economy appeared to be in some form of a free fall. We had no idea how long it was going to last. And as much as we needed to turn to our real charge of catalyzing economic growth for recovery, you simply could not do it while business after business was closing down and laying off people, and unemployment rates were skyrocketing. And it's kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Until you take care of the pressing human needs, you couldn't lift people's attention and generate the ideas and the innovation necessary to come up with the final recommendations. So our work was in 2 parts. First, stabilize and support, to consider the resources and strategies of the different sectors of Maine's economy that they would need to survive this COVID-19 impact, whatever that ended up being. That report was published July 15th, and I'm going to share with you what we recommended. So we started in early May and worked those first several weeks to get our first set of recommendations before turning to phase 2, which would be what we were really charged to do. And our final report was in November. So we had a charge, we had some people, and we had a due date. And so that was our approach. The 6 subcommittees we broke into for the first phase of our work were really by economic sector. And we tried to group people into those sectors where they could most contribute from their experience as what would be needed for their sector to get through this. The committees, not surprisingly, education and workforce, healthcare, nonprofits, childcare, and support services. That was kind of our conglomerate. And Bill got to chair that group back when we started. The third was innovation, the fourth, infrastructure, the fifth, hospitality, tourism, and retail, which was under dire pressure at that point in time. And then the sixth was manufacturing and natural resource-based industries. So each subcommittee was empowered with a chair, a subcommittee chair, and a group of 8 to 10, probably around closer to 8 people each. And they invited in guest speakers, collected information, and came up with a set of strategies for their industry. Over that 8 to 10 week period where we worked together, we decided to do everything based on consensus. And we had the benefit of urgency. We had to get a report to the governor by mid-July so she could start making some investments using the CARES Act dollars as soon as possible to get it out as rapidly as possible. So what we had to do was hone these ideas. So each of the 6 committee came up with many ideas. We forced them to come up with their top 2 to 3. And all of those were put together. And then the committee as a whole narrowed those down to just a set number. So we figured if we didn't set the priority or focus, then nothing would come of it. And we would not be helping anybody if we didn't prioritize. So what came out of that July 15th report, which at the time seemed extremely bold because we didn't know what we'd be getting from the federal government, if much of anything. There was a lot of talk, not as much action on the federal level at that point in time. But we broke our recommendations on July 15th into 3 categories. The first and most important was support Maine's people, because without people being able to get to work, the businesses wouldn't have the talent they needed to run their businesses, even in dire conditions. The second and very, very important was to stabilize Maine employers, to keep as many people employed as possible, to try to make that free fall not as far and not as hard. And the third was to recognize that even though we were in a crisis period, we had to continue investing in Maine's infrastructure. So in the supporting Maine people, it probably comes as no surprise, public health. It would quickly became apparent our public health infrastructure was not up to the level it really needed to be, nowhere near. So we had recommended multi-millions of dollars for public health, for childcare. If you don't have care for your children, you cannot go to work. It was just as simple as that. And that became a real crisis point. And those shortages have been there for a while, but it became evident that needed immediate support. Pre-K through 12, you may recall the decisions were being made of how on earth would we reopen the schools. And the entire recovery committee said, we can't go into recovery if the schools don't open, because the children will be home with their parents and it won't enable their parents to work. Some for higher ed, for housing, for immigrant workers. And then in the employer department, we recommended $350 million for employer grants to immediately get some relief money to them, some workforce development. And then under infrastructure, the primary piece was broadband and connections. All of us went remote immediately. So our livelihoods to work, for our children to have any education, and for healthcare delivery was all online. And we very quickly realized what was working and what was not working, to a point that our very lives depended on that infrastructure. Now, at the time we made that recommendation, the people interviewing us were like, well, where's this money going to come from? And we said, we really hope it'll come from the federal government. And sure enough, some CARES Act money started to flow. And over the course of the next couple months, what that had given the governor is a roadmap. So when those monies came, she actually utilized that July 15th report to allocate monies. And she put money into childcare immediately, 2.2 million. Into the pre-K 12, she distributed 364 million of CARES Act money. She offered 200 million in economic recovery grant programs to employers across the state. And of that, 5 million went to childcare businesses. And then an additional 40 million was brought forward to support Maine's tourism, hospitality, retail, and small business sectors. She also took some of those CARES Act funds and put them into the Maine Healthcare Financial Relief Program, some into critical housing, because you may recall a lot of issues were occurring where people couldn't pay their rent. And so there was a lot of attention paid to keeping people with their basic needs. And then 5.6 million into broadband. At that point, we felt very good as a committee. Okay, we'd given her a roadmap. She didn't follow it exactly, but she really did focus on those priorities. And we immediately turned our work to phase 2 of our work, which was to sustain and grow. And this phase of the ERC's work was aligned with the vision of that 10-year plan. And I'm just going to read you the vision, because this is really what we were trying to get back on track towards. The vision was by 2030, Maine will be an international leader with a vibrant, sustainable, environmentally responsible economy. All across the state, the people of Maine will have access to an unmatched quality of life and good paying jobs. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, because this phase of the work culminated in our final report, which he will share with you.
Thanks, Lori. And it's amazing to think back. I guess it was about a year ago when this was all when the group was put together. It was one of these beautiful days like we've been having, and I was taking a pandemic break on my bike, and I got back, or I don't know, lunchtime ride about 1 o'clock, and I checked my phone and I had all these texts at a 207 number, and it said, Governor Mills and Josh Broder would like you to join an economic recovery committee. And I said, okay, sounds good. And they said, good, because we're announcing it at 2:30. and then I said, okay. And then I said, who is this? And it was Hannah Pingree. And that's how I got roped in. And one of the first things that encouraged me about the future of this state was watching a group like this come together. There was no pay. There were a lot of hours, a lot of hard work, and people really rolled up their sleeves and got to it. Another thing that's hard to remember is that we had the July report, and then a lot of the thinking was back in May of last year that the November report would be the after the pandemic time. We thought at the time that November was going to be this Shangri-La where everything was behind us. And so as we worked on it, we realized it wasn't going to be that, but these are still recommendations that we hoped could help us spring forward as we get out of this. And that's hopefully where we are closer to now. So I'll walk you through this. These were the recommendations that were in our report, basically 8 points in 2 buckets. We want obviously to grow Maine's economy, but particularly with a focus on attracting and sustaining our people, because we think the two are integrally related. We really want to emphasize innovation. That's our first pillar, to invest strategically and consistently in next generation technologies, work on public and private initiatives that grow key innovation sectors, invest $100 million annually in commercially promising research and development. There are a lot of states we compete with that are more aggressive in this area, and we want to take it up a notch. And reinvigorate our Maine Innovation Economy Advisory Board with diverse entrepreneurs. One of the themes you'll hear a lot as I go through this is our feeling is we know we live in the whitest state in America, and we know that America is getting more diverse all the time, and we can't be left behind. We have to become a more welcoming place. We're a state that gets a kick out of describing people as from away, and that's cute. But we really feel like we need to be more welcoming to folks of talent who want to live in a great place like Maine. We also have an emphasis on entrepreneurship. We want to supercharge high growth entrepreneurship while sustaining our vibrant and resilient small business sector. So we don't see Maine moving away from these great small businesses that we've had over the years, but we want to add a more dynamic entrepreneurial element. We want to fill the gaps in our ecosystem for entrepreneurs and unlock the potentials of entrepreneurial spirit in our small business sector. We want to make Maine more welcoming to immigrants. We know how many successful startups in this country are started by immigrants. We'd like to see more of that happen here in Maine, and there's a lot we need to do to be more welcoming. In terms of talent development, and I was in charge of the group that was focused mostly on talent, we want to create more training and education opportunities for working adults in Maine. That's an area where we lag behind a lot of the states with whom we compete. We want to invest in higher education programs to increase degree attainment. As many of you know, we don't have as many college degree earners as we'd like to have in the state of Maine. And that's something we want to put an emphasis on. We want to prepare workers for our innovative and high demand sectors. As we were working on this report, we heard from a lot of employers, and you do as well, I'm sure, that it's hard to find skilled workers. And I can tell you, even in our business at the ballpark, we can't find enough people. And it's even worse, I think, than people thought it would be. So this is something we really need to work on. We want to expand internship opportunities linked to higher education. We talked a lot about the Rue Institute and some of the things they're trying to do. We had college representatives, including Lori LaChance. James Herbert from UNE was on the committee, and we think there's a lot more we could be doing, public and private, public education and private education, creating more dynamic intern opportunities for students and give a boost to our businesses as well. We want to restore immigrant rights to access public benefits and the workforce. There are a lot of laws that make it difficult for folks who don't have the proper paperwork to access public benefits and actively participate in our workforce. We think that's really important. And we want to attract talent. This was a trend we were feeling as the pandemic hit, as folks realized they could live anywhere and telecommute. We have an incredible place to live, and we want to really take advantage of that and not be shy about it and bang our chests a little bit. So with that, we recommended that we have a statewide rebranding effort to come up with a campaign that welcomes diverse groups with respect to race, ethnicity, and other dimensions of human difference to Maine. As you know, there are a lot of smaller entities that go out and advertise the virtues of Maine. We want to make that a little bit more coordinated so that our money is better spent and more effective. And then to sustain Maine's people, we put an emphasis on internet access. Susan Corbett on the phone is an expert in this, and it's been interesting, I think, to see how much of a national focus has been put on that. But as we approach the pandemic, this was put into high relief that Maine has so much we need to do to ensure better broadband access to all Mainers. We want to put an emphasis and funds behind that. Early care and education supports. Lori mentioned this. This was ongoing throughout the pandemic and is becoming increasingly, again, a national priority. It's very hard for folks to go to work when they don't have folks to take care of their kids. So we recommend comprehensive reform of our fragmented public-private early care and education systems to increase access and affordability, and build a skilled early childhood education workforce to prepare children for lifelong academic and career success. We don't have enough people to fill the roles we need if we're going to make this happen. Housing is an increasing challenge. The pandemic, as you all know, made this even harder for folks to find affordable housing in Maine. So we want to create and preserve more affordable, efficient, and high-density housing options across the state through bonding, zoning, and land use regulation, and provide housing stability for our workforce. And then lastly, our 8th recommendation was to address structural inequities, make Maine a diverse, equitable, and inclusive state where all Mainers can reach their full potential. We recommend performing a comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment of Maine, develop a 10-year economic strategy with an emphasis on DEI, and hire senior level champions at the state level to promote DEI in our state government. So those are the 8 recommendations in our November report. And Lori, I could turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. And now we're on to Susan to share with us what the governor decided to invest in.
I think it's great. I got the job of how the governor wants to spend money. That's a win. So I will say that serving on the Economic Recovery Committee was the hardest job I've ever loved. There were moments during the almost year that we were together as a subcommittee chair of thinking, how are we ever going to do this? How are we going to get through this? And I think the most remarkable piece about the ERC committee, the full committee, this was a group of very diverse people, different backgrounds, different industry sectors, different political affiliations. And yet through a process, we were able to come to a consensus. It was really a great democratic process. So the main jobs and recovery plan outlines Governor Mills' administration's priorities for the $1.13 billion allocated to the state through the American Rescue Plan. There are three focus areas. The first, immediate economic recovery for $260 million. The plan includes providing recovery grants and loan guarantees for Maine businesses and nonprofits. It includes investing in our heritage industries like agricultural infrastructure and processing, forest products and manufacturing, and seafood facilities and processing. Funding includes lowering healthcare costs for small businesses, replenishing the unemployment trust fund, sustaining new businesses and entrepreneurs, and encouraging business diversity. The second, long-term economic growth for $305 million. This includes making strategic investments for future prosperity, which includes jumpstarting innovation, launching a health workforce initiative, creating clean energy partnerships, and establishing a domestic trade program. It includes expanding and strengthening Maine's workforce by attracting and retaining workers, expanding the Maine Career Exploration Program, creating the Remote Worker Welcome Program, training workers through Maine CTEs and higher education system, advancing equity, and connecting workers to job opportunities. The third, for $547 million, is infrastructure revitalization. This funding includes establishing the Maine Connectivity Authority to achieve universally available broadband, to build more affordable housing for Maine's workforce, a plan to save money through energy efficiency, and expand childcare and early childhood infrastructure. Funding will invest transportation improvements to fix Maine roads and bridges through a capital work plan, to protect infrastructure from climate change, to launch a workforce transportation pilot program, and expand municipal and public EV charging. There is a plan to invest in outdoor recreation and marine resources by upgrading Maine state parks, by bolstering fisheries and wildlife infrastructure, and improving the fishing industry's infrastructure and monitoring. Other plans are to support essential drinking and wastewater projects by ensuring the safety of drinking water, and to repair wastewater infrastructure, and to facilitate energy needs by creating interconnection grants. The plan includes modernizing state technology by upgrading government systems, accessibility, and cybersecurity protections. As Governor Mills stated, this federal funding represents an unprecedented opportunity to address the long-standing challenges that have constrained our state's ability to thrive over the years. By encouraging innovative small business growth, investing in our workforce, and building essential infrastructure like housing, childcare, and broadband, we can accelerate our recovery from the pandemic and build a stronger, more prosperous Maine. This plan will help us ensure that Maine is renowned as a place where you can get a good education, have a rewarding career that pays well, raise a happy and healthy family, and live comfortably in a community that you love. Back to you, Laurie.
Thank you, Susan. Great job. And Dana is with us. So Dana Connors is bat and cleanup here, and he's going to share with you some business reaction to the Economic Recovery Committee's work and the governor's investment.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lori. And it's a pleasure to be on with you, Bill and Susan. We're all part of this incredible process. And I agree with everything that has been said before me. I would also note that Susan reminds all of us who participated that when you really stop to think about a course of 7 to 8 months with a goal as impactful, as important as it was before us, and that 37 to 40 people of diverse backgrounds came together and finally reached consensus. In the world I live in, that's a pretty remarkable thing and shouldn't be ever taken for granted. But my reaction is based on behalf of the business community is one that is very, very positive. It's one of appreciation. It's one of significance in what we've seen, and expresses incredible vision and I think success going forward. Let me tell you why I feel that way. I first want to go back and indicate that it was extremely fortunate and perhaps fortuitous that even before the pandemic struck, and Lori has mentioned this before in her comments, that even before the pandemic, the governor and her team were so visionary in terms of creating something that I've not seen in my experience in state government. Truly, I've seen efforts, and they were well intended, to create a plan, a blueprint for going forward, a path forward that set up priorities that did exactly what this one does over the horizon of 10 years. But this did it in a way that I've not seen done before. This really did tap into the real critical issues, the priorities that at that time were so important to the state's hope for success and growing our economy. When you think about it, it's workforce. There's nothing that's perhaps more challenging and yet more important than both the supply side, but also the skill that goes with that. And Lori and I did a series of reports called Making Maine Work, in which we looked at that, and was startling. And the fact that this is emphasized as one of the two highest priorities is really speaking to the importance in and of itself. But the other one's innovation. Innovation is one of those that often gets overlooked because it's not as well understood. But when you think about it, in and of itself, probably 50% of our GDP growth comes directly from innovation. New ways of doing things, new techniques, new ideas. And when you look at what this strategic plan speaks to in terms of building out the future through our heritage, fishing, farming, and forestry, bioscience, and how all of those areas, if we commit to it, including R&D and commercialization, how all of that builds our future, there's no mistake. Then they added this element that is called infrastructure investments, and they've been spoken to here as well. But think about it. This was before the pandemic. It was broadband, it was research and development, it was housing, it was childcare. If I didn't say transportation as a former commissioner, shoot me, because I should have. But all of those you think about today is so fundamental. So with that in mind, believe it or not, that was before the pandemic hit us. That was the priority for 10 years that this state had really significantly bought into. The thing that, I'm not, by saying this, you're going to know I'm older than dirt, but since 1984, when I came to state government as Commissioner of Transportation, was there for 11 years, and I've been at the chamber for 27. There have been a number of attempts to create what this plan did accomplish, and they hoped to accomplish. But they always fell short. Not that they were not well intended. In fact, I participated on some. What often was the curse was they always went from top down, or in the case of one, there were too many things added without a real sense of priorities. So it became a Christmas tree where everybody got something, and that cannot be a path forward. And so what this did was to really prioritize the things that are most important and built a story around it. God bless them for doing that, because it proved itself invaluable. The very Economic Recovery Committee had the good fortune of knowing what the priorities were. Can you imagine what it would have been like without that plan in place? I can't. Because the old saying is, if you don't know where you're going, any pathway will do. Well, maybe that wouldn't have been necessarily our case, but it might have been kind of close. But the plan saved us. And when you have two great chairs like Lori LaChance and Josh Broder, and 37 or 40 people wanting to do what's right, the results kind of showed in the plan that Lori, Bill, and Susan have spoken to. I was so impressed by what came forward out of that. All those things that I just spoke of, workforce. When Bill spoke to the need to welcome new Mainers, there is no greater evidence of that than you look at our demographics. If we kept every young person in school today and didn't let them leave, we wouldn't even come close to the number that are retiring. A statistic that I read not so long ago that said between 2000, think about this one, 2000 and 2050, 83% of our growth in our workforce will come from the immigrant or the immigrant family. I mean, that is an eye opener. And if we don't grasp that and make that part of our future starting yesterday, then we're missing the mark. And yet that still lives with some residual concern. Most of us are products of immigrants. I, for one, just a generation or two ago. But it's a little different today. Well, not that much different, because I'm of Irish descent and they were not very welcomed in the state of Maine back when my grandparents came. But you see that all the things that are before us today is built upon what the ERC and the ERC committee, with when they took that plan and kind of flushed it out with more detail, and you heard the things that were spoken to you today, really paved the way for the governor when she received this $1.1 billion. She put it precisely to the very areas that have been set forth. The plan, the Economic Recovery Committee, and the dollars went to fulfill that. That's why I say we're extremely fortunate. I'm very bullish. There's a lot of promise in this. The key is to stay together, to work together. There will be adjustments, because right now we're finding that adjustments brought about because of the economy, because we're finding right now that there's a strong demand for workforce, but the supply is the problem. And it's attributed to a number of things. The extra money for unemployment, the bonus money, the $300. Sometimes it's a part of what we see and hear when it comes to two families who work. One has to stay home because of who have kids in school. There's a number of reasons, but the fact remains that's going to have to work itself out. The other thing is supply chain, and you've all probably seen evidence of that, is that in business of varying sectors, it's hard to reach that product that you want in the time you want it, in spite of what you're willing to pay. Sure, you're going to pay more for it, but there's an element or two that's just not being produced, perhaps because they don't have the workers, because this is a US issue. It's not just a Maine issue. And that has become a problem. It'll work itself through. There's no question about it. It takes time. But the monies that have been put in for the Paycheck Protection Program, for the $1.1 billion that's part of the Americans Rescue Plan, have been incredible investments in today, but as well as our future. And we can thank the strategic plan. We can thank the Economic Recovery Committee, because they paved the way for what needed to be done at the absolute perfect time. My only hope is, this is an editorial comment, you can forget about that. Right now we're in the midst of a legislative session that scares the living daylights out of me because of the issues before us. But that same governor who had the vision to put us forward and to deal with the very challenges that the pandemic faced is also the governor that has reason, and we're putting a lot of hope in her. But there's a number of bills that can minimize some of the things that we hope to accomplish. We can only pray that we'll be effective in making sure the good prevail and the bad do not. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Dana. Trish, how do you want to handle questions?
I think we've got a small enough group. I can sort of facilitate. I'll go between screens. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I know I have a few, but I'm going to let the participants. If anyone has a question, please put your video on and raise your hand. If you prefer to write in the chat, I'll monitor that. But if someone has a question, please put your video on and raise your hand, and I will. Peter, I see you first.
Thank you, all of you, for all your information that you've shared with us. That really was great. One question: the funding for all of these initiatives, is it all coming from the federal dollars that you spoke of? Is there any any state general fund commitment as well that needs to be factored in, or is it all federal money that's funding this?
Well, I think that's a yes and yes. I think the monies we talked about came from the federal government.
Yep.
And she decided to divvy them out to the most critical issues and the recommendations that we put forward. In addition to that, in her budgeting process, she also allocated a good deal to many of these critically important issues. And Dana would probably know more about that than I, but.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you think of the process that we're in right now, we've got a month to go to deal with a number of bills, but front and center, to your point, Peter, is you've got a supplemental budget that you just learned about that came out. Part one budget was passed, the 8.3. Because revenues come in strong this year above projections, there's about 500 million that's part of the 500 million package, the supplemental package. In that, as Lori said, she's put a number of things that are funded by general fund. The two, or one of the, well, two of the most obvious ones is the effort to bring educational funding up to the 55%, which was a statutory requirement of years ago, we've never reached. And the other was to bring revenue sharing for the municipalities over the 2 years from 3.75 up to 5% of general fund. That is a state revenue issue that is, the debate around that will be amongst the issues. Will that be sustainable? Because we went from 7.3 billion to 8.3 billion, and now we're going to 8.8 billion. So some of the debate will be around, is that sustainable? What else we may want or instead of? And the other part, the other issue is a bond issue that a lot of it, as Lori said, was funded by way of the federal program, but there are two that she's put forward. One is 100 million for transportation, which has been an annual for the last few years. And the other is 50 million for Land for Maine's Future, a very popular program in Maine that buys land to preserve. And then the third one is what we've been talking about, the 1.1 billion. That is, she very wisely has put it, it's a separate package. We want to get it out as quickly as possible so that it'll go into effect immediately, which means 2/3. If not, it goes in 90 days after she signs it. But that is one-time money. It's a separate package. It doesn't become part of the state budget in any way, but it does exactly what the previous speakers have spoken. It gives that shot in the arm to our. Did I oversell that?
No, that makes great sense. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Lori, and everyone. That's great information.
I did have another question. What do you think about attracting people to Maine, given the tax structure here? Yesterday, one of the taxation committee gave a 6-5 vote to approve the 3% surcharge on income over 200,000. I think this group, as well as some of the attorneys we work with, and we've seen that flight out of some of the other New England states in terms of tax. How do we attract people, particularly people who may be able to be part of that public-private partnership to fund entrepreneurship? How do we do that given Maine's relatively high tax structure?
Yeah, I'll take that one because I live with taxes all the time in the legislature. There were about a dozen tax bills that were put into play this year that went up to 13.5. There was one, as you mentioned, Pat, that came out of the committee on a party line vote that went to 3% over 200,000. That was very similar to one a few years ago that we narrowly, I was on the side of opposition to that. We narrowly lost it. And it wasn't so much the tax that was what helped the other side who was pushing. It was the fact that money is going to be used for education. That made it hard for us too, because education is such a key to economic growth and the lives of our people. But there was another way to do that. So we opposed it. And but that's an issue that I will be very surprised that the governor, if it gets through the legislature, and it could very well, that the governor will veto, and then we will vote to sustain it. And I say that not because of any inside information, but she's been very clear publicly about that position. The other tax bill that went through, that was carried over, it didn't go through, it was carried over to the short session, was increase it from 715 to 795. Those do have a chilling effect on attracting people. We saw a great influx of young and older people because Maine handled the pandemic as well as they did. A healthy economy depends on healthy people. We heard the governor say that time and time again. She was right. That resonated. People came to our state. You have to keep them here, however, and taxes play a role.
Can I just put an exclamation point on that? For decades, I've been talking about Maine, and we're always saying it's the quality of life is great here. You have the great outdoors. You can go to work and then be at the lake or at the ocean in a matter of moments. You can ski on the weekends and whatever. And we've been talking about, oh, it's so important. It's clean and safe. Finally, that argument works with people because in a pandemic, what people wanted was to get outside, to move freely, to feel safe, to have a place for their children, and that safety suddenly trumped everything. Health and safety gave us what we've been kind of hoping for a long time. Bill?
If I could quickly add something too, my youngest is 24 years old, so I'm out of the childcare debate. But my eyes were open on this committee in thinking about the value you create with those tax dollars. I think is really important. And so one of the things that came up was there was a guy on our committee who said his celebration when his kids graduated from childcare, daycare services was a bigger celebration than when he graduated from high school. He and his wife could barely afford to make ends meet and afford childcare. So I think one of the questions about taxes is how that money is spent and if it brings value back to folks. And that really opened my eyes on my particular committee to that issue.
Agreed.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from any of the participants?
Tammy's
I have
got her
one.
hand raised.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Thanks. So I'm interested, there's been so much conversation lately about supply chain, geopolitical risk, and we have some fairly strong manufacturing component to our economy. And I think one of the things, at least some of the companies I'm involved with, are interested in maybe onshoring some of their production that they've offshored to China or whatever. And so, you know, the problem becomes our labor content and whatever it is that we're making. And to the extent that we can move things back on shore, minimize geopolitical risk, minimize supply chain risk, and use advanced manufacturing technologies, you know, is there anything in all of this that is promoting that piece of it, which is also then ultimately going to lead to higher skilled jobs as well, because it becomes more production and engineering versus, you know, some of the mainstream manufacturing. That was a mouthful, so.
Would like to take that.
Well, that's a very good question, as we say, when we're not quite sure how to answer it, is that it is a very good question, by the way. And I think that you're finding that there's a number of things occurring. Some of it's in the report that recognizes both the entrepreneurial effort, the innovation, the advanced manufacturing, building our future on the assets that we have, particularly looking at the heritage. But there's also a federal public policy that goes with, when you do with both the export and the import industry, and when you have, again, this goes to taxes, and I don't want you to think for a moment that everything revolves around taxes. People will pay whatever it takes to do the things that make the economy grow. Bill spoke to education, perfect point. But sometimes it's either labor cost offshore, or it can be a tax forgiveness offshore. It's those types of things that can encourage people to go elsewhere. And I think that what you're finding at the national level on the tax policy, believe it or not, is an effort. It started during President Trump's time, in which they reduced it. Now they're moving it back a bit. They went from 30 some to, I think it was 18, and then moving it back some in order to fund some of these federal programs. But I think that helps. I think that the issue before the legislature that didn't get acted on, but they were studying it, that had to do with offshore activities and the taxes you paid and so forth was helpful. But I think a lot of it speaks to what you indicated, is how much can we actually do here, because we're in a global economy. And I think that you find within this report. If you looked at the entrepreneurial section or the innovation sector, and Bill referenced it, I think you're going to find some very encouraging things. I can't cite them to you off the top of my head, but there's a real emphasis on those areas. And that's the area that really will help us stay more in the continental rather than go elsewhere. There'll always be some of that, but you don't want it, as you implied, you don't want it to be a rule. You don't want it to be a way of life, because that ends up hurting us. And I will say this too, I mean, there's probably a half a dozen bills right now that are pushing, you know what project labor agreements are? I mean, it's really a union effort, and it's not my point here to say that, to interfere with how employers and employees decide to operate their company. I mean, they need to have that right. If it's unionized and works out, that's fine. But when you put into place statutes that say, if you're going to build a construction project, let's say a highway, which I'm familiar with, a bridge that exceeds $10 million, you've got to have, it's got to be unionized. When you say that renewable energy projects, if you're not unionized, you pay a 30% premium to be able to participate. Farmers who've never been unionized, there's a bill in that says that farm workers can be unionized. When you start to force that type of thing, you are encouraging people to go elsewhere. And that's why we're trying hard to make sure that, because what happens is it just bears out that many of our contractors can't compete because they're not unionized. There's an open shop. And so we would be, the statistic I saw said 94% of our contractors would not be able to compete the way they're structured now. That would not be in our best interest. And again, it's not a condemnation on the rights of companies or employees to unionize. It is forcing it to happen in order to participate. That's what's wrong.
Last call for questions before we wrap up.
Can I sneak one in, Trish?
You can, Hank.
You guys talked about diversity and bringing other types of people besides white people to Maine, and I was kind of curious, what were some of your findings that was maybe stopping that from happening, or what was making us maybe unattractive to other people?
We talked a lot about that in my group, in the talent group. I think it's there's almost a chicken and egg thing, right? Where if the state is disproportionately white to begin with, it's by its very nature somewhat less welcoming. One of the things we talked a lot about is how well our colleges and universities have done attracting more diverse students, and is there a way to remove the idea that you come to Maine to get your degree and then you leave to go work. And we talk about everything from, these internships for these young people. And even James Herbert at UNE said, look, these diverse kids tend to have diverse parents, and they come for parents' weekend and to drop them off. And we should be thinking about, job fairs and caravans, and, talk more about the virtues of staying here. So there's little things we could be doing, I think, that you might not really think of, but it's going to take hard action. I've also been encouraged. A lot of us have been involved in sort of impromptu CEO discussions on this subject, how we can work together on it. I'll just give you an idea that I learned from LL Bean. LL Bean has a program now in certain departments. If they want summer interns, which a lot of people do to get their work done, what they've said is if 50% of the interns you hire are of a diverse background, you can hire as many as you want. So the idea is if I find 3 people who are of a diverse background, I can have 6 interns. They sort of flip it. So you're driven by, so I'm hearing, and these ideas are being shared around the community. It's things like that that I think will make a difference, but it takes effort.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you. I'm going to echo Catherine said it so eloquently. Thank you so much, 1, for your time this afternoon, and 2, even more than that, your incredible devotion and commitment to the state of Maine. It's amazing the work that all of you achieved amidst the challenge of the pandemic in such a very short period of time. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I just had one quick question, and you sort of addressed it, Bill. These are phenomenal ideas. Who implements them? How do they happen? Is it seeded through different communities like the CEO committee? Doesn't all fall to the legislature, which I think you alluded to, Dana? Who actually makes sure that these terrific ideas happen?
I think it's incumbent upon all of us as
I agree,
leaders
yeah.
across this state. And the problem is we think it's government's job, or we cede that to them. And remember, legislative seats turn over every couple of years, and governors turn over every 4 to 8. And the problem is we turn to a flavor of the month priority, where everybody says, since they're trying to make their mark, they think up a new idea or a new variation on an old idea, and that takes us off track. And so as leaders, if we can come forward and say, let's stick to the plan, and if our elected officials follow the plan, then we can achieve absolutely phenomenal results. But if we get straight off on, I hate to say it, but ego-based, like, oh, I want my idea. Once you start picking apart the threads, it unravels.
Thank you.
Well,
Well, you've
I
got
would-
a talented group. Oh, I'm sorry, Dana, go ahead.
No. I'm probably going to add very little, but I would say that it is incumbent upon all of us. I mean, there's a role, there's a responsibility in that plan for each of us. The biggest challenge would be exactly what Lori said. If and when the governor changes, it's up to us to be sure that we stay on top. It is a plan that's intended to be updated based upon conditions changing. But boy, if we let this slip by without staying totally committed to it, we are going to be our own worst enemies, because it is the lens through which we should be evaluating policy issues and decisions that are made going forward.
And I think that we have to remember and keep reminding that plan was formed by a bipartisan group of people that came to a consensus. It was just a fabulous process. So it really doesn't matter who's the next governor or who the next legislators are. It's a plan that was built by a very bipartisan group.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
No, that was my wave to
Me
Trish.
too.
Thank you very much, Bill, Susan, Lori, and Dana, for joining us this afternoon. We're going to let you leave because we're going to continue on into our business meeting. But again, thank you. And I was just going to say, you did not have an accountant on the committee, but you have just now educated a great representation of the accounting profession in Maine. There are a lot of talented people on this call, and hopefully we can do our part to implement various aspects of the plan. So count us among your fans.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Trish.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Best wishes.
All right, Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you, I think. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention. I hope you found that useful.
Well, thank you, Trish. Is that my cue to start? All right. Well, welcome everyone to the annual business meeting. of the Maine Society of CPAs. And I too want to thank, though they've stepped off stage at this point, I too want to thank our panelists. That was a great discussion and great information. And speaking for myself, I mean, I could really just tell that the strong interest and enthusiasm that the four of those folks, have for the work that they've been doing with the other members of the ERC. So that was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure we're all eager to not only get to the other side of the pandemic, but also to see our state move on to an even more robust economy once we get to the other side of COVID. We have a brief business meeting agenda, just a handful of items to tackle, but before we move on to our formal election of the upcoming slate of board members and officers for the coming year, I did want to take just a moment to thank all of you and other members of the Society for the opportunity to have served as board president of the Society for this past year. Without question, this has been a unique year for the Maine Society, as it has been for everyone. And sitting here in May of 2021, I'm heartened to note that despite the challenges presented by the pandemic, the Maine Society of CPAs has weathered the storm and is poised to embrace and meet the opportunities and I'm sure some hurdles as well, which the coming year will bring. Our society is blessed with a board composed of some of the most talented and energetic professionals I've had the pleasure of knowing. And I am genuinely excited by the enthusiasm which our society's leadership brings to the table. It truly bodes well for the future. I want to also extend a special word of thanks to our executive director, Trish Brigham, for her truly tireless dedication to the Maine Society over this past year. Her attention to detail, her persistence in the pursuit of the many projects and objectives which are endlessly on her plate, and her flexibility as she orchestrated the transition from in-person meetings and events to virtual over this past year, have all been invaluable to our society. I personally shudder to think what this last year would have been like without her stewardship, her insight, and her wise counsel. And so, Trish, please accept my, and I'm sure all of the board's tremendous thanks for all you have done and continue to do for the Maine Society of CPAs. So with
It was a team
that,
effort.
I'm sorry, Trish?
Thank you. It was a team effort.
Well, it absolutely was a team effort, and all the members of the board and the society members at large. I mean, we've all played a role in this, so certainly thanks to everyone involved. So our first real order of business is to vote or to approve the slate of board members and officers for the coming fiscal year. And I believe and I understand that the slate has been disseminated in a couple of different avenues by email and also having been posted on our website. So I think probably the simplest way to handle this would be sort of management by exception. And what I'd like to do is suggest that perhaps we could adopt this proposed slate by consensus, absent any objection. And what I would ask is if there are any nay votes, so to speak, if anyone who is of that mindset could raise their hand and so indicate. But absent any such nay votes, I would suggest that we could adopt the slate as it is presently has been presented. Prior to that, though, I did want to throw out there if anyone had any questions around the composition of the proposed slate of officers and governors, by all means, certainly welcome any such questions. Okay, hearing none, could I suggest that by consent, by unanimous consent, that we adopt the proposed slate of officers and members of the Board of Governors for the coming year? Any objection? None noted. Thank you for that. And having voted by consensus or by consent to adopt the proposed slate of officers and governors for the coming year, I do want to extend now an official special welcome to 3 new members of the board, Heather Perot, Dave Barrett, and Ryan Curry. So thank you, all of you, for your willingness to step up and join the board. I'm sure you'll find that we're an exciting group of people, and I'm eager to continue to work with you as well as existing board members as we move forward. And please know that your participation and your willingness and eagerness are greatly appreciated. So thank you to all 3 of you for answering the call, as they say. On the other side of the equation, they say that all good things come to an end. And so it is with mixed emotion that we acknowledge today the conclusion of Maria Gwynn's term on our Board of Governors. I'm confident that I speak for all of the board members in noting Maria. Where are you, Maria? There you are, I see you now. In noting Maria, that you will be sorely missed. But at the same time, I want you to know how very much your service on the board these last several years has been appreciated. In particular, your leadership of our CPE committee has been of critical importance as we face the inevitable shift, even before COVID, away from live CPE to virtual and online courses. Your innovative approach to rethinking the delivery of CPE and how best the society can facilitate same has been critical as we've revamped our approach to what has historically been a mainstay of our society's offerings and programming. Now, I know there is a token of our appreciation, which I believe Trish will be making arrangements to get to you separately. But for now, please know how truly grateful and appreciative we all are for all you've done. We wish you all the best in all of your future endeavors, and by all means, please don't be a stranger. So thank you again, Maria, for all of your work. And a round of applause, I think, is in order for Maria.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure working with you, certainly. So moving right along, I did want to take a few moments of your time to just update the membership at large with respect to the board's strategic planning initiatives. And our incoming president, Spencer Hathaway, is going to share some thoughts as well, but just a brief overview. Over the last few years, and in the face of increasingly rapid change impacting our profession, our society and our board have been working on refining our strategic planning to reflect and adapt to these changes so that we can continue to further our mission and serve our members, our profession, and the business community at large here in Maine. Particularly in the face of the pandemic, in recent months, we've parsed out our strategic planning into 5 primary areas of focus. Some of these have been on the table for some time. Others represent a new approach to how we plan and develop our society's future activities. The 5 sort of buckets of work that we anticipate pursuing going forward include an expansion of an ever-growing emphasis on advocacy. Again, that's been a successful and a growing area of effort in the last few years in particular, but we see that as an area for continued emphasis. Exploring ways to continue to support the pipeline of new professionals, like the advocacy initiative. That too has been something that we've made great strides towards pursuing in past years, but again, something that we want to continue going forward. Focus on resources for smaller firms. This is perhaps something of a new area of attention that we think would be important going forward. And then another new area of focus would be efforts related to public relations and promotion of our profession here in Maine to a variety of audiences. And then the fifth primary bucket of these efforts involves continuing to explore opportunities for further strategic collaboration with other societies and or with other similar professional organizations. We've sort of culled the strategic planning efforts going forward down into these 5 buckets. Just before the annual meeting commenced at 3 o'clock, the previous board members at least had a brief meeting to discuss some thoughts around how we might tackle these going forward. And I might ask Spencer if you could share a few thoughts as to what our thoughts are after that meeting earlier this afternoon.
Sure, thank you, Peter. I'll keep it fairly brief, but as Peter noted, we did just meet as the existing Board of Governors to split these 5 pillars of the plan sort of amongst ourselves. Our plan is to sort of divide and conquer as a board these strategic initiatives with the goal of the small groups really putting teeth to these pillars over the summer and meeting and really having some meaningful discussions about how to continue each of these at our next board meeting. Coincidentally, I think the panelists that we just had on kind of showed how effective this kind of strategy could be. So I'm really looking forward to working with these teams over the summer to detail our plans in those areas. I also just want to say I'm very excited to work with the Board of Governors that we just voted in today. I think it's really a period of rejuvenation. I think it's sort of the feeling across the board right now with the way things are going. And I think it makes all the sense in the world, given this period of rejuvenation, to have increased the size of the board to the 12 that will be coming on. And I think we also have brought on some members from very different areas of industry, from education, just some diversity of backgrounds that are really going to help us implement this strategic plan and these pillars. Before I send it back to Peter to close us out, I just wanted to echo some of the words that he said and thank him in particular for his leadership and his mentorship over this most challenging past year. I want to thank the rest of our board and our membership for sticking with us throughout the pandemic. Again, a special thank you to Maria and all of her efforts over the course of her term. And of course, a very special thank you to Trish, our executive director, for all of her work. I look very much forward to working with all of you over the coming year. With that said, Peter, I'll send it back to you to close us out, I suppose.
Great, thank you, Spencer. And before I do, since this is a business meeting, I figure I should at least open the floor up to any of you. If there are any matters that any of the members in attendance this afternoon would like to bring before the meeting as a whole, by all means, don't be shy. All right, well, hearing and seeing none, I want to thank you all again for attending today's annual meeting. Your continued commitment to and interest in the Maine Society are greatly appreciated, and I believe are critical to the continued success of the Society and of the profession here in Maine as a whole. I would urge one and all to never be shy about sharing your ideas and input with respect to any of the Society's undertakings, including but not limited to the strategic planning initiatives that we just outlined a few moments ago. And never be shy about reaching out to any members of the board or to Trish. It's a small community, and we'd all love to hear from one another. While I have been, again, grateful and humbled to have served as your board president, I'm equally enthusiastic about continuing to serve on the Society's board going forward. And I look forward to working with Spencer and the rest of our leadership in the coming months ahead. So with that, I think it would be appropriate to, unless anyone else has any other matters to bring before us, I think we can conclude today's annual meeting and wish everyone a happy rest of their day and their week. And we look forward to seeing you at future events and meetings and such. So thank you, everyone, again.
Wait. I just want to say thank you, Peter, for your leadership. It's been a pleasure working with you this year. I'm glad you're going to stay on the board, but I just wanted to toss that out. I've really enjoyed working with you, and I think your leadership has been terrific navigating. I think you were a great person to have in this spot during these tumultuous times. So thank you. And now I'll stop talking.
Well, thank you, Trish, for your kind words. Again, it's 4:17, so we're 13 minutes ahead of schedule. I'm not sure when the last time was that I did something ahead of schedule, but that's great. So everyone have a great afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye now.